Well, welcome into Beyond Sunday. I'm your host, Luke, and I am joined by Tim Celek, who here on staff is our chief of staff. And before we get into our conversation with Tim, I want to mention again, Gather 25 is coming up March 1st. Here at the Springs, we are hosting it from 1:45 to 6 p.m. And ultimately what this is it's a gathering of the nations, right? Across the globe, there's going to be people that have sessions where they talk about certain things. We will be doing the London session, I believe, which is going to be on church persecution. So that piece will be super interesting to hear how things are across the globe and not just in our bubble here in the United States as far as faith and how it's affected in other places. So it'll be a good time. We'll get together and get to learn more about those places, as well as just connect with community here at the Springs, which is ultimately what we want as well for you guys. So if you guys go to thesprings.net/gather25, you guys can sign up there, whether you join us here live at the Ocala campus or you watch from home, because it is a 25-hour event that you guys can watch via live stream at any point. You can get together with your small group on that Friday night, whatever it might be. So thesprings.net/gather25. Hope you guys enjoy it and sign up. And we can't wait to see you guys there. All right. Tim, you taught here at Ocala this weekend.
Yes, sir.
And so we are happy that we are having you on the podcast here this time. And want to kind of just really the ultimate goal is, people hear you speak, but they might not hear a ton of your story.
Okay.
And, we want to make people, our pastors, human here and give people kind of some more background into that. So for you, Tim, who is Tim Celek? Where did you come from? Some people might have thought because you were helping a lot with the Middleton campus and still are, but some people might have thought, well, Tim started showing up at the Ocala campus and then he was here again and again. They might not know anything about you. So Tim, can you give just some background into where you were at, what you've been doing until this point here?
Well, I mean, originally, I've tried to communicate this up on stage because originally I was born in Ohio. So Northwest Ohio, right on Lake Erie, a little small town called Port Clinton. And it's the walleye capital of the world, okay? So like anybody knows what walleye is, a fish, it tastes good. Anyway, and then right after college, I went to college in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So after college, my wife and I, we literally, my first job was out in Southern California, specifically Orange County, California. Okay. So like we have Disney World out here, think Disneyland, that's right. Orange County, California. And we moved out there for that first job. The first job I had was actually with a thing called Athletes in Action.
Okay.
And Athletes in Action had a competing wrestling team at the time. And I was on a Division I scholarship for wrestling in college.
Really?
In Milwaukee, yep. And so I wanted to continue my wrestling, I guess you would call it, career, because it was close enough to the 80 and 84 Olympics. So not that I was that good, but you always have a dream.
Yeah,
you always have a dream. So then that's what took us out there. That's where Athletes in Action, the headquarters were. They're a part of, at the time, it was called Campus Crusade for Christ. Now it's called Crew.
Right.
And so we were on staff with Athletes in Action for 2 years. Blew my knee out completely, complete major reconstruction. And then through that process, ended up on staff at a church as an intern, and initially an unpaid intern. And the church at the time was the church we were attending. And so, because I said I wanted to be in ministry, I didn't know what that meant at the time. So they let me come on as an intern. So I did that. And so I stayed on staff of that church for 5 years. So, and then I don't know how much you want me to keep going, but like
So outside of being in that internship, what was it next for you at that church? Because obviously you weren't an intern for 5 years, I assume. So what was kind of the next role there at that church?
I've always been I've been a lot entrepreneurial. So I ended up starting their singles ministry. So back in the day, they don't do it too much in the church world now, but I started their singles ministry, went literally, and that was back in the days when church had like Sunday school classes and stuff like that. So that's how I organized it around that kind of idea.
Right.
We went from like 50 singles attending, in a younger area of life of their singlehood to by the time I was done there, close to 1,200 people.
Mm. Wow.
And that was like through 6 different quote unquote groupings of people,
Right.
everything from people who were like in divorce recovery, people who were career path, people who were young adults but college. It was amazing to see what God did at that church. And and then somewhere right around March of 1988, I was sitting in a staff meeting, and I had already told the senior pastor there that because I wasn't actually on the speaking team at that church. I was the singles pastor, so that was my role. That's what I did.
Right.
And then I told him, he was a high profile gentleman in the Christian world at the time, and I said, hey, I'd like to do what you do. I'd like to be a senior pastor. Because I didn't grow up in a church, so I didn't know really what it took to do that. And he said, well, I'll look around for you. And so because he had the profile, he actually did, but none of the places seemed like they would fit me. And then in March of 1988, we were in a staff meeting, and he comes walking in and says, we're going to plant a church. And then he gives the little bit of the background behind it. And so when the staff meeting was done, I just walked right up to him. I literally walked right up to him, and I said, I want to do that. And so that's how it all happened for me.
Wow.
And and so in the fall of 1988, September 11th, 1988 to be specific, planted a church in what's the more southern part or central part of Orange County, close to the ocean, called Costa Mesa, California.
Yeah. So before we go further into that, you mentioned you didn't grow up in church. You didn't know what it looked like to be a pastor necessarily behind the scenes and doing those things. For you, when did essentially your testimony, but kind of what age did you receive Christ?
Oh, okay.
Just because I find it interesting when there's a pastor who didn't grow up in church. My dad being someone like that as well, right? I often find that those pastors tend to do pretty well because they have, they got to this point maybe in their adult life or whatever, where it's like, you have a new lease on life.
Correct.
Whereas me, I grew up in the church, so it's been a gradual growth. My mom describes my dad's faith as really overnight transformation because he didn't know a love like that. He didn't know an acceptance like that, a grace like that. And so he had no idea. And so that really made for a powerful testimony. Right. And then now to the point where we are with the spring. So for you, is that was it a night and day change for you? And what age did that happen?
No, that's a good question. Good question, Luke. Yeah, for me, it was the summer 1976, June 1976. I always say it this way now. I was attending at different times the Fellowship of Christian Athletes huddle.
Okay.
That I got invited to from a person named Ken Bowersox. He was the chemistry teacher. And if you think chemistry teacher, maybe not in your generation, but in my generation, he looked like the prototypical chemistry teacher. He had the plastic pocket protector.
Oh, man.
He had pens in his pocket. He had the kind of glasses that you see on old movies. Like
That's
kind
so
of
good.
Yeah, he just was.
What was his name?
Ken Bowersox.
Oh, man. Shout out to Ken.
Yeah, and his wife. And they were anything other than something like when you think about like how I was wired up, total jock, total athlete, 3 sports, letter person. And so, I mean, it was just, so he actually invited me and I didn't realize he was praying for me.
Wow.
Because he's praying for a number of different people, but he was praying that somebody who had high profile in that high school, particularly a young adult guy, would give their life to Jesus and then start having a difference on the high school campus. Well, I didn't know any of that at the time, but he invited me when I was a sophomore to the huddle. I said no. And then he invited me again to some of the different things that were going on when I was a junior in high school. And the neat thing is I started hanging out more because there were some other guys that I respected that were athletes who were attending. Right. And so that summer, he asked me if I wanted to go to a sports camp. Well, the person who was at the sports camp was a guy named Archie Griffin. who was a 2-time Heisman Trophy winner for Ohio State University. And so I was getting recruited for football a little bit for Division I schools. And I thought, man, if I could be in the same place, the same location as Archie Griffin, I'm there. And so I went there, but I didn't realize that God had other plans for me while I was there. And so that whole week went by, and just like any sports camp, it was all guys at that time, and it was the kind of thing where God was just working in my heart. And at the last day of the camp, the speaker, who was also a running back for Ohio State University, he gave like the old school altar call, and asked who would like to give their life to Jesus. And so I walked up and gave my heart to Jesus.
Man.
And so the hard part is then I went back home. That was in middle part of Ohio. I went back home, but I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, there was like nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I still went to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes Huddle. So from that point there, the summer before my senior year of high school until my senior year of college, literally was just on pause. I mean, I tried to read the Word of God, didn't know what that meant. I didn't have any church because in my small little town, there wasn't what I would call a dynamic Bible-believing church that a young guy would want to go to. So my senior year in college, a guy from Athletes in Action, who was the rep, that's how I would call him, the representative for Athletes in Action for the Milwaukee Brewers and the Milwaukee Bucks, came down and shared with the team what back then was called a 4 spiritual laws presentation. And after he got done sharing that, so that's 4 years, fast forward to tape, right? We're now close to 1970. Well, it would have been, I don't know, it doesn't matter, but close to 1980 now. In the 81, I said, I'm pretty sure I already did that years ago, but I said, I don't know what to do. What's next?
Yeah.
And so he just started spending weekly time with me. I mean, it made all the difference in my life. And it was neat because it was something that the things that he walked out with me were just what we would call today basic discipleship. But back then, Campus Crusade for Christ had something called the transferable concepts that if you look at the core tenets and the core principles, that's what it was. It was just literally Christianity 101 for people who had never stepped into the realm, but they had because they gave their life to Jesus, but like, what's next?
Right.
And so, man, and his name was Mike Siegfrieds.
Okay.
So, I mean, Ken Bowersock's teacher, and then Mike Siegfrieds just had an indelible imprint on my life for the trajectory. And then he started asking me as we were spending time, would you ever see yourself being like a part of something further?
Yeah.
And that's why we went with Athletes in Action.
Did you ever get a chance to talk to Ken again after you graduated from high school?
Oh, yeah. Numbers of times. In fact, I won't go into this too much, but when I was going to quote unquote Talbot Theological Seminary, while I was interning unpaid at that church, I went and raised dollars, and Ken and Maxine, that was his wife's name, they actually sponsored us to get that Bible training.
That's awesome.
Way back then. Yeah, it was just phenomenal.
That's awesome because I was talking to my mom. I was talking to my mom about this last week, about just the act of planting the seed, which is what Ken did for you, I'm sure, and praying for you. Oh, yeah. Like that was the initial seed planting that happened, and then the boldness to invite you to go to the FCA event, all that kind of stuff. But I was and talking with my mom about this. I was like, we have to have the boldness to be the one that plants the seed, gets the ball rolling, knowing that we may not ever get to see the fruit of what we did and the seed we planted. But that's why I asked, like, did you get to talk to Ken again? Because I'm sure that nothing makes him happier than knowing that you ended up acting on it, and it came to you coming to Christ, sponsoring you, he and his wife and everything. Like, those stories never get old, and being able to hear that is awesome. So would you say that time, like giving your life to Christ as a high schooler, following up more as like a college age student, do you think that probably maybe lit a larger fire in you to do like the singles ministry, to make sure that people heard about Jesus? Because as I said to you, like I grew up in church. This is all I know. And it was all gradual for me. And I just feel like there's a lot of power and someone that accepts later in life, even as a high school or a college student, to maybe have more motivation as they get older of like, I got to do what people did for me.
Oh, totally. I mean,
Yeah.
for me, I could never understand why in the church we were part of in California, not the one I started, but the one that we were on, the only other real Christian
Right.
church I was a part of.
Yeah.
I was always inviting people to come with me, particularly people that I'd meet. Back then, I was really into racquetball.
Okay.
It was like, at that time, it was like the pickleball
Right.
of today, right?
Yes.
And so I would always be inviting people to come from the racquetball courts to church, because it was literally, they all knew where this one church was.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. It was an owner of a restaurant that Sue and I would frequent later in our life from our move. But I remember when he decided to come. And at that point in his life, he was a single dad. And what hit me is he was sitting there. I wasn't, because of my role at the church, I wasn't able to sit with him, but I could get in because he told me he was going to be there that Sunday. And I'm now like looking at my church through his eyes. And I'd always invited people. He was like the first one that accepted my invitation.
Yeah.
And then I remembered, as I'm like now watching, quote unquote, my church through his eyes, this business owner. I mean, back then I didn't really understand business owners and stuff like that. But I'm sitting there like, I'm looking at people they're just kind of dressed goofy on stage.
Yeah.
And the songs we're singing that weekend. I still remember that weekend.
Yep.
I still remember that weekend. I was
Yeah.
like, oh no,
Yeah.
get me out. Let's get him out of here. No, this,
Yes.
because up until that time, I wasn't like even thinking. And what I realized is, I get excited talking about this because that's really been the trajectory of my life, is hanging out with people who are far from God, have no relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
Because I really do remember what it was like to be them.
Yeah.
And I also remember when I was in high school, and I'm now trying to invite my, for your audience, I'm sorry, I got this cold. I remember trying to invite my wrestling team guys, my high school football guys, my baseball team guys, right? And they'd always say no to me. And to come to the FCA huddle. And but it didn't stop me. I mean, because they respected me.
Yeah.
But they'd still say no. And then in college, I literally did put it on the shelf. I mean, because I just didn't know really what to do and how to go about it, because I didn't know where I find a church. But man, once we dove into the church that I ended up on staff of, I was like a nonstop inviter person.
Yeah.
And most people would say no, even back then.
Right.
But that's when we started that brand new church in '88. I said, we're going to start it for people who were like I once was. And I wanted to make sure that that guy that was there that day, and I looked at what he was seeing, I didn't want anybody to come to this brand new church and go, this is a sorry excuse as a representation for Jesus. So so I would just say, I want to always be a seed planter, but I also want to be a relationally connected to people who don't have a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about you planting the church that you did in '88, correct? What was the name of the church again?
The Crossing.
Okay, so you plant the Crossing. You had received, when did you say, like, how long ago before that had you really started acting on your faith, going to church, all that sort of thing, before planting in '88? You said it was in the 70s?
So when I was in my hometown, it wasn't. So that was 76 when I came to faith in Jesus.
Yeah.
So no church.
Right.
Then when I went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, no church until the last couple years of my college, because I heard of this church and the word Mike Siegfried's went.
Okay, gotcha, yeah.
And so he encouraged me to go there. Yeah. And that was an amazing church. But it was a drive, and you're a college student.
Right.
Didn't, so it's probably an excuse, but didn't go as frequent. Yeah. So when we got to California, and we were now out there with Athletes in Action, we started attending, like we found a church right away. We started attending that church. That would have been in 1982. So in 82 is when 82 is my biggest formation time. So it sounds weird to probably everybody that's listening to me now, because it wasn't until 82. So I'm out of college now.
Right.
I'm married. I'm literally still a brand spanking new believer.
Right.
So from 82 to when I started church in 88, I was still like, in some ways, a brand new Christian.
Figuring it out.
I was figuring it out.
In the early stages of figuring it out too.
And early stages, and I'm on staff at a church.
So I am interested. You go from, you want to always want to be a seed planter. You're inviting people left and right. Was it easier or harder for you to invite people to church once it was your church? Like once you started the church, did you find that there was on either end of the spectrum of like, was there, I don't know, as far as the inviting people, growing a church, obviously the best way to grow a church is to invite people. But for you, did you experience, do you remember that transition of going from being on staff at a church to it being the church that you started and inviting people to come to your church?
Yes. The church I was a part of for those 5 years, it was a great church, by the way. Evangelism wasn't, it was a program in some ways that we did at the church. Like they taught you how to knock on the door. Even they taught you where to park your car. They taught you how to, if there were kids there or people watching TV, but it really wasn't a life lived alongside of or with people who weren't as of yet Christians, right? So what we started the church in 88 with the expressed idea that the church was literally for people who weren't Christian and didn't go to church. And that was back then in 1988, it was a fairly radical concept.
It was a new concept.
Yeah, in some ways. And so, and then everything we did, so it was very easy for me to invite, because now in some ways I it's probably too strong. I controlled what was going on stage.
Right.
But as a church planter, you kind of do, because
of course
your
staff's not that big.
No, there is no staff.
Yeah, exactly. You're the staff.
You're the staff, and then and you have you got volunteers as staff, right? So it became so easy, but also then the way we started in 88, we were probably, if you would have attended in 88, you would have felt it like it was more of a concert, a secular concert, because we didn't even do Christian music.
Yeah.
We did secular music.
Really?
We did I know it sounds weird in a church now, because now we've replaced it with videos, but we did dramas that would communicate the express theme of the day. Yeah. And then we would do dramas, and a little vignette, little sketch, right? Like a Saturday Night Live kind of thing, I think. But we would do that with a secular song on both ends of the vignette. And then I'd get up and speak on that biblical topic that we were addressing. And so, in the early days, it was so easy for me and then the team that planted the church to invite people, because they knew that every weekend they were never going, their friends were always going to hear something that was relevant.
Yes.
And it was also done in a way that they could immediately identify with.
Yeah, and a lot of ways that reminds me of the Springs, in the way of the early days of the Springs. Bikers coming to the church. The first wedding that my parents were involved in was like a biker wedding, you know what I mean? Just so off base of what my parents are personality-wise, but that's who they were reaching, right? Anybody and everybody that would come to the church, not necessarily Christians. I remember there's like a newspaper clipping, I think, in the hallway somewhere on the other side of the building here, but I think it said something about the church being a rock and roll church or something like that. And it was an article from the early 2000s or something, or maybe late 90s, but that's what it reminds me of too. So there's a lot of similarities to there, which you and I, there's more to this conversation, and we'll get out of here in a couple minutes too, because I do feel like this has to be a continuation of it, a conversation, just because there are similarities. You plant a church.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to that story. You step away, and then you come on staff here at the Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of conversation to be had there. Like what brings you back to the Springs, to a church staff in general. You've already planted a church, done it for 3 decades or so. And so super interesting. But we do have to run here. The last thing I will say, I love that you said that you guys do secular songs. It wasn't the norm. It's still not really the norm.
No.
There are some churches that will do a performance song that I've seen as well. But what I will say is, if you are someone, and I'm talking to our listeners, our viewers, if you are someone that goes into, whether it's the Springs or you visit a church out of state or on vacation, whatever it is, if they do a secular song and you feel off put by it, just know that song's not for you. Like that's not for you. You go to church already. You're a Christian already. Those secular songs can really tie in people who don't know any other song you're going to play that day. So I think that that's also the big thing too, that a lot of people miss now, is we think the service is about us. But it's like, no, there's maybe some things. The message might be speaking directly to you. The music might not. But it's fine. It's not for you. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of really cool stuff. I know in your story, Tim, and a lot more that we'll unpack later.
Okay.
But I appreciate you joining the podcast today, and
Thank you.
I look
Thanks for
forward to
inviting me.
continuing the conversation. So, all right, guys. Again, thesprings.net/gather25. Go there, sign up, whether you attend at the campus here live or you do a small group viewing of the live stream as well. We'll put out resources for that too. So we look forward to hearing from you guys about Gather 25, what you guys think. It is coming up here in a couple weeks, again on March 1st from 1:45 to 6 p.m. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will catch you guys next time. See ya.